Hi, welcome to Joe Blogs Live. If you're watching this live, then great, send me a message. I might be able to respond to it. If you're watching it on a record, then I'm talking today about Russia's sudden change of heart, whereby they are now interested in a peace deal in Ukraine. And the reason why Russia is wanting a peace deal is because the USA has really ramped things up. It's threatening bone crushing sanctions, which basically would kill all of Russia's revenue from its oil, gas, and other products that it's selling predominantly to India and China. So this comes after a meeting from the UK, France, Germany, and Poland that's been held in Kyiv on the 10th of May. And the USA was party to that meeting, but only by conference call. They didn't send a representative. And off the back of that meeting, Keir Starmer came out and actually came and said to Russia that they needed to agree an unconditional peace settlement. So let's hear what Keir Starmer had to say to start with.
Now got to today is absolute unity across a whole range of countries around the world, including the United States, that there must be that 30-day unconditional ceasefire. That is the greatest unity on this point we have ever had, pulling different countries together. Clear, absolutely, there must be an unconditional ceasefire for 30 days. Clear that that means it must be without conditions.
So we've heard talk about ceasefires before, and there's been a lot of backwards and forwards, and Russia have sort of mused to say, well, maybe, maybe not. But this time around, it looks like Russia is serious, because following that presentation by Keir Starmer and the announcement that everybody wants a 30-day ceasefire, President Putin held a press conference at short notice.
Начать предлагаем без промедления уже в следующий четверг, 15 мая, в Стамбуле, там, где они проводились ранее и там, где они были прерваны. Мы настроены на серьезные переговоры с Украиной. Их смысл в том, чтобы устранить первопричины конфликта, выйти на установление долгосрочного, прочного мира на историческую перспективу. Не исключаем, что в ходе этих переговоров удастся договориться и о каких-то новых перемириях, о новом прекращении огня.
And in response to that, Vladimir Zelensky has posted on X, let me just go back on that, and he's saying it's a positive sign that the Russians have finally begun to consider ending the war. The entire war has been waiting for this for a very long time, and the very first step in truly ending any war is a ceasefire. There is no point in continuing the killing for a single day. We expect Russia to confirm a ceasefire, full, lasting, and reliable, starting tomorrow, May the 12th, and Ukraine is ready to meet. Well, that doesn't quite tie in with what Vladimir Putin said. He was saying 15th of May, but 15th, 12th of May, it's all within the next few days, which is a major step forward in terms of a war that's been going on for more than 3 years. And not surprisingly, Donald Trump posted on his Truth social media site. He doesn't use X. He's got his own social media site. And he said, a potentially great day for Russia and Ukraine. Think of the hundreds of thousands of lives that will be saved as this never-ending bloodbath hopefully comes to an end. It will be a whole new and much better world. I will continue to work with both sides to make sure that it happens. The USA wants to focus instead on rebuilding and trade. A big week coming up. So in terms of wanting this ceasefire, why they're coming around the table, the real reason is because of the threat of basically reciprocal tariffs. So we've talked a lot over the last few weeks about Donald Trump's announcement on the 2nd of April when he stood outside the White House and said that he was applying tariffs against basically every country in the world who's importing products into the USA. And he's now in negotiation with most of the countries. The UK actually was the first to the table. They've announced their deal. And if you follow the channel, you know, I've recently posted on that. I think the USA basically held all of the cards. They had all of the power in that relationship. And so the UK has agreed to the 10% tariff that was proposed by Donald Trump. And we've now got reciprocal, very little tariffs on all USA imports into the UK. But a US senator has tied these tariffs into the situation in Russia. And this guy is called Lindsey Graham. So we just have a look here. You can see that he's put together a bill that is proposing bone crushing sanctions of 500% not on Russia. So this isn't a sanction against Russia because Russia's already got hundreds and thousands of sanctions against it, which haven't really had the impact that the West wanted it to. The whole point of those sanctions was to bring Russia around the table and agree a ceasefire and stop the war. It hasn't happened in over 3 years. But what we've got now is a slightly different approach. And it's picking up on Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs and basically saying that any country that's found to be buying oil or gas or other petroleum products or uranium directly from Russia, that country will be hit with a 500% tariff on all of its exports into the USA. So basically, this is doubling down on those reciprocal tariffs. In fact, it's ramping them up. I've been talking a lot about a 145% tariff on China being prohibitively high, but obviously 500% would blow things out of the water. And in terms of putting that into perspective, this table here shows the biggest buyers of Russian oil in 2024. And you can see that there were basically two main players. China was by far the biggest buyer. It purchased around 2.2 million barrels per day, which equates to around 47% of all of Russia's exports of oil. And that had a value of $78 billion. So China handed $78 billion directly to Russia in exchange for petroleum products. And India was a close second. It was purchasing around 1.75 million barrels per day, equating to around 38% of all of Russia's oil exports. And that totaled over $54 billion. So in total, between India and China, they bought 85% of Russia's oil exports. Now, I've also got Turkey on this list, who bought around 6%, equating to 34 billion. So still a meaningful amount of money. Then we've got the European Union. We've discussed that before. You would have expected that no European Union country is still buying Russian oil, but the landlocked countries in the middle of Europe who've been getting their oil on pipelines from Russia for the last 30 years, they're really struggling to be able to get replacements at a cost-efficient level. So they've been given an exemption to continue buying that oil. Obviously, if this 500% bone crushing tariff comes into effect, I don't think they'd buy any more because it would kill all of their exports to the USA. So what we're talking about here is if China and India continue buying at these levels, or any levels, in fact, they will find that all of their exports to the USA suddenly have a 500% tariff on it. And in terms of putting that into perspective, this table shows the exports from China, India, and Turkey to the USA in 2024. And we've discussed this in previous videos in terms of China. So in 2024, China exported around $440 billion worth of goods to the USA. And that was out of their total of about 3.6 trillion. So the US exports equated to around about 12.3% of all of China's exports. Now, obviously, if the USA was to apply a 500% tariff on those imports, nobody would buy those products because they would then be 6 times more expensive than they were last year. And nobody is going to pay 6 times the price. So it would absolutely kill all of that trade. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know that China is already struggling economically. So if it lost all of its exports to the USA, that would be a complete disaster. So essentially, China would have to make a decision as to whether or not it was going to carry on buying $78 billion worth of Russian oil, or if it was going to give that up and keep its exports to the USA. So I think overall, if you look at the impact on China, that the exports to the USA are far more important than buying oil from Russia because you can buy that oil from somebody else. And we've talked recently about OPEC. They've actually been increasing the amount of oil that they're producing, even though oil prices are falling at the moment because Saudi Arabia believes that it needs to punish some of the countries that haven't actually been keeping within their quotas. So OPEC has the ability to increase production to meet China's demand if it stopped buying all Russian oil. So China has a perfectly viable alternative to buy oil. And if it was going to lose $440 billion worth of trade to the USA, I think it would walk away from those Russian purchases. And obviously, at the moment, as I'm making this video, there is a meeting going on in Switzerland between the USA and China to try to agree some form of middle ground on the tariffs. As it stands at the moment, we've got 145% from the USA's perspective and 125% from China's. Obviously, that's not realistic. That's not going to stay in place forever. So they will come to an agreement. So there will be a degree of trade between China and the USA. It won't die overnight. It probably won't be 440 billion in 2025, but it's likely to be hundreds of billions of dollars. So I think this is a really smart move in terms of forcing Russia to come to the table. And if we look at the Indian situation, they are exporting in 2024, they exported just under $90 billion worth of goods to the US. And that equated to more than 10% of India's total exports. So if that was hit with a 500% tariff, obviously they would be dead in the water, those exports. They wouldn't be happening. And again, India could purchase its oil products from somebody else. There's plenty of other countries it could source oil from. And the same goes for Turkey. Even though it's purchasing a smaller amount than the other two, it's still exporting $16.7 billion worth of goods to the US, which equates to 6.4% of its exports. And Turkey is another country we've talked about a lot. Its economy is in total crisis, so it can't afford to lose any exports. So once again, Turkey could buy its oil from somebody else. It doesn't have to buy it from Russia. So from that perspective, all of these countries have a choice in terms of whether they continue the relationship with Russia. But from Russia's point of view, this is basically their sales list. These are the countries that they're selling around 90% of all of its oil to. So if they stopped buying, then Russia would lose all of that income. And as we've talked about before, Russia is dependent on oil and gas revenue. It equates to somewhere between 30 and 50% of total revenues. Now, it's going down at the moment because Russia is selling less and the price is going down, but it's still a meaningful chunk. And as we've talked about in other videos, Russia has been drawing down on its national wealth fund to keep funding the war in Ukraine. So Russia is coming to a breaking point in terms of being able to keep funding that war. The summary of today's video is that the changing gear from the USA, this new idea whereby rather than trying to sanction Russia and break Russia's trade and intercept all of those ships that are moving oil and gas and all of those sort of things, which is logistically really difficult to do. Rather than doing that, the USA has now taken a completely different approach and is saying, okay, you can carry on selling your oil to India and China and Turkey and whoever else. But if we know that those sales are going through, then we are going to apply a 500% tariff on all of the imports into the USA. So basically, we will stop dealing with all of those countries. They will lose access to the biggest economy in the world. That is just not feasible from China, India, and Turkey's perspective. They wouldn't do it. That's not palatable. So if they're faced with that option, it's likely that they will stop buying Russian oil products. Russia will lose all of that revenue. Its oil industry is already in trouble, but it would be in severe difficulty if it had to stop production because it can't store 10 million barrels of oil per day. It simply doesn't have anywhere to put it. So it would have to cut back on its production. And as we've talked about previously, when you cut back on oil flows, that can be really damaging to the future because it's very difficult to get it going again because you can have real serious issues under the ground. So the overall summary of today's video is that the new sanctions that have been proposed by the USA look like they are going to work because Russia has now agreed that it's going to come around the table. President Putin has said that he's on board for a 30-day ceasefire with a view to agreeing some form of permanent peace. And this is the first time, I think, over the past 3.5 years that we have seen a serious proposal that looks like it potentially could lead to some sort of peace settlement. Now, I am live and I've got lots of messages along the side here. I don't know whether you can see them on the screen or not, because this is the first genuine live stream that I've done. So I'm still getting familiar with it. But we just pick out a couple of people here. I've got Stuart Gibbons that said morning. So morning, Stuart. You must be in Europe or you're up very, very early if you're in the US or Canada, or maybe you're in Australia. I don't know. But yeah, hi. And I'm just picking out a few different messages here. Let me just pick some out. So I've got one from Lap that says, Joe might be a bit naive with Putin with such an upbeat take. Putin has put Russia on a wartime economy. It's unlikely he can stop. he loves to delay. Well, there's definitely validity in that point. I think, we have seen President Putin delaying things and talking about stuff in the past and then it not actually coming to fruition. But I genuinely think that this new proposal, these new tariffs, is a game changer. This looks very different to any sanctions that we've seen applied against Russia or any other country, to put it in that context, since this war started. So I think this is a seriously bad move from Russia's point of view. They would lose an enormous amount of revenue here if they ignore this, and China and India are forced to actually stop buying its oil. That could really cause serious problems in the Russian economy. So anyway, thank you for all of the people who've joined this live stream. There's lots of people online here. I don't have time to go through all these questions. It's quite difficult for me to. Let me have a look at the first person who said something, because Angel Benules, and sorry, I've definitely said that wrong, was the first person to join. He said, "So happy you're reporting breaking news." Well, the reason I wanted to is it can take quite a long time to make these videos. I'm making them because I have to record it. It might take me half an hour to do the actual recording. It takes me a couple of hours usually to put together the idea and then flesh it out with some of the data that we've talked about today. So 2.5, 3 hours maybe of prep. Then I do the filming. Then you have to do the editing, which can take another hour or more. And then you have to upload it to YouTube and do all the fill all the details in, put your thumbnail together. So it can be 6 or 7 hours quite easily through the day before you've got the video ready to go live. And sometimes by the time that's happened, it's not really as exciting news as it was when I first thought of it in the morning. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go live, wanted to try this new format. Hopefully it works quite well. As you can see, I don't use a script. So a lot of people have talked to me about scripts before, and I can see you reading your script. Well, you can't, because I don't have one. And I think this format works better for me because I'm better talking off the cuff live than trying to remember scripted comments and repeating things that other people have said. That's not really my style. So let me know what you think of this new format. I'm thinking about moving into this on a medium-term basis, that I'll have a mixture of maybe some pre-recorded stuff and a lot of live things like this. You can obviously watch it after the event. You don't have to join live. Hopefully you are watching this after the event. There'll be lots of people watching. But yeah, let me know what you think, whether you like this format. I'm keeping it to one topic. I think that was the feedback from the last live stream I did, that it was too wide ranging, too many different things. People didn't really know what was going on. I was talking about China, then Russia, then various other things. So I'm keeping it to one topic, but I will go live like this. I probably won't schedule it because it just tends to happen as I'm doing it. I think this is a really good topic. Let's go live. So I'll probably do more of these. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking. Bit of a catchphrase of mine, so I'm going to keep using it. Thank you for watching all the way through to the end. I have got something to put a smile on your face in a second, so don't worry about that if that's your favorite part of the videos. I know some people, that's for some people, that's the only reason they watch. But also thanks to everyone that's supporting the channel. If you bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks, or if you're a Patreon or a YouTube member or buy me a coffee member, thank you so much for that. I'm not quite sure how the supers and super stickers and everything work on the lives yet. I'll start looking into that. But hopefully we can get into that as well. And here is something to put a smile on your face. So let me